All right, let's start. I'm sure that because it was midterm week, a lot of people will be using this Friday to catch up on sleep. And also, I'm sure trains are a problem, and people are always coming in late anyway, so let's just get down to business. All right, so what's the topic this week? I'll give you a clue, it's written on the board.
Cybercrime.
Yeah, it's not just cybercrime, it's just regulation of cyberspace in general. So what is regulation? What do we mean by regulation? What goes in this little spot here? What is it to regulate something?
Norms.
Pardon?
Norms.
Yeah, so part of it, and that's actually a few steps ahead, one of the ways you regulate things is norms. But what does it mean to even regulate something in the first place? What are some things that we say are regulated, and what does it mean that they're regulated? Mo?
Control.
Yeah, it's about control, and it's specifically about controlling what things people access. And is that all, or is there another element? I'll give you a clue since I'm asking. There's another element. So if this is what, it's another element of control or regulation. What? When? So when is actually going to fall under the more general heading of how. So it's not just what people have access to, it's how people access them, when they're allowed to, where they're allowed to, etc. So it's controlling what things people access and how they access them. So, give me some examples of things that are regulated. And it doesn't have to be internet specific. Let's talk about non-internet things first. What are some things that are regulated? No.
Trading, commerce.
Yeah, trading. So there are regulations around trade. So what sorts of things are regulated in trade? Or what are the things in place that govern how trade occurs?
You can't trade along international ties without paying tariff.
Yeah, there are certain rules that govern who's allowed to trade with who across international lines and what rules you have to follow. So if I want to start making toys in my basement and sell them in China, there's a lot of rules I'm going to have to follow that determine how I ship them, where I ship them, when they get there, what happens at the borders, etc. So that's governing the how. This is controlling things like how things get traded. What are some other things that are regulated? Like physical things that either you are stopped from having or there's some control over the amount of them you can have, etc. What are some other things that are regulated? No.
Alcohol.
Alcohol is one. What are the regulations around alcohol?
ID.
Yeah, so you need to have an ID to buy it, but also more importantly, what does that ID have to show? Say you're 21. Yeah, you have to be 21 here. Now, are those regulations the same everywhere in the world, or? No. Different places have different regulations. So, for instance, how old do you have to be to drink in Canada? I can never remember if it's 16 or 18. It's one of those teens.
Out the womb.
Pardon? Yeah. There are some places where, like, really, I think there are rules in parts of Europe where as long as you're under parental guidance, you can start drinking, like, whenever you want, more or less. And then there are other places where how old do you have to be to drink? It's a trick question. There are some places you're just not allowed to drink alcohol. It's just fully illegal. So that's the sort of thing. What are some other things that are regulated? Cigarettes are regulated. Again, you have to be, what is the law in New York now? Is it 21?
18.
Or is it 18? I don't actually know what the law, as you can tell, I'm not somebody who's buying cigarettes.
I think it's 18.
I know it was 18, but I feel like I've seen some things that now say it has to be 21. I don't know. It's either 18 or 21. I don't really care. Don't smoke.
18 to smoke it.
Oh, I think that might be what it is. It's one of those things where, like,
21 to buy it legally in the store.
Whatever it is, if you're 16, you can't get cigarettes.
Yeah.
If you want to know smoking laws, go right ahead. There is probably else is almost certainly going to be getting regulated within the next 5 years that's related to cigarettes.
Marijuana.
So yeah, weed, pot, marijuana, reefer, whatever you want to call it, is something that is regulated, and those regulations have actually been loosening. So there used to be the case that like you had any pot, you could get arrested. Now it's if you have a certain amount of pot gotten from a certain type of source, it's legal. One thing which is currently unregulated, which will probably start being regulated soon, also related to both of these, are e-cigarettes. So e-cigarettes are probably within the next 5 years going to start getting regulated because there have been a whole lot of people choking to death on their own lung oils from e-cigarettes. Unsurprisingly, smoking e-cigarettes turns out not to be good for you.
Well, you're talking about regulation like in the preventive sense, though, not like regulation in like the accessible sense, though. Like,
Yeah, so here's the thing to think about regulation. Regulation is something that falls on a scale from complete freedom to do whatever you want to absolutely no access or ability. So on one end of the thing, we have like complete freedom, and then anything in here is any type of regulation. And then if you cannot get access to anything at all, specifically if you can't get any information about it, what do we call it? If you cannot access it. Yeah, so banned or censorship if we're talking about ideas. So bans and censorships are an extreme case of regulation. And so you can think about all of it falling on a scale. So some of the things we're talking about here are on the ban side. So things that are banned in this country include what?
alcohol, trading, or seed.
What is just like, no, like full stop, you cannot, if you are found with this thing of any amount in the United States, you can go to jail for it.
Drugs?
Yeah, certain amounts of drugs, like certain types of drugs, like if you have cocaine or heroin, it's just banned. You cannot have any amount of it. Or crystal meth, you just can't have it. What are some other ones? Yeah, uranium. You cannot have uranium in your possession. Other things, you cannot have any type of like human property. Any type of slavery is banned. It's not just like you're allowed to have a slave if you X, Y, no slavery. Now you can think of other things which are regulated but not banned. So things like alcohol, where you can have it provided X, Y, and Z. There are other things though, like you're not allowed to make your own alcohol and sell it unless you meet certain criteria that prove that your alcohol isn't going to poison someone to death. Because I'm pretty sure like the line between making alcohol and making poison is pretty thin.
I mean, it is poison.
Yeah, it is like low-grade poison.
We want to get
And then we have other things which are utterly unregulated. So what's unregulated? Just give me an example of something that's totally unregulated. And it's actually rather hard to think of things that are fully unregulated, because you might be like, water's unregulated. But in some sense, water is regulated because tap water has to pass certain, like they aren't allowed to reconnect like the dirty sewer pipes straight into the water stream. It would save the companies a lot of money, but they're not allowed to do that because then you'd be drinking poop.
I mean, I can't really think of too many, but the way I see like unregulated is like when you buy like a unlimited Metro card.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. Is you can imagine there are certain people who are just banned from riding the subway. Then you can imagine if you buy like the regular Metro card, it's you can get on, get off, but you can only do it a certain number of times before you have to repay. And an unlimited Metro card, you have complete freedom. You are not regulated. You can go on. Although in truth, with an unlimited, you are still regulated in certain ways because you can't like swipe 17 people in with one card. So it's like really hard. I was thinking maybe air is unregulated, but it is in certain ways regulated. Like you're not allowed to just like spit all sorts of fumes into the air. I guess there's got to be something. I guess your own hands aren't regulated. Well, I guess they are to some degree because you're not allowed to punch someone. So like everything is regulated, and it's all just a matter of degree. And so one thing with regulation, the big thing with regulation is how much. Because we don't want anything goes anywhere in the world, but we also like our freedom and our ability to make our own decisions. So that's really what the key is with regulation. So things that get regulated are like, how do we trade? How do we exchange? How do we produce things? The whats are just the goods themselves that get produced or exchanged. So other sorts of things that are regulated, like movies are regulated. What are you not allowed to show in movies?
Pornography?
Yeah. Movies with certain ratings, and if you want public release, you cannot show pornography. You cannot show actual explicit sex scenes in a movie. That's why there are always those awkward fake sex scenes. Then what are some other things you can't do?
Extreme violence.
Yeah, you can't literally, like, if you decided, you know what, for our special effect in which this person dies, we're literally going to kill someone on set. That is not allowed. You're not allowed to depict somebody being murdered on set. There's also a lot of rules around what you're allowed to do and not do to actual living animals on movie sets. Which is why sometimes, and this is another one where there are different rules in different places. So sometimes a movie scene that depicts an animal dying actually had an animal dying being filmed for it, and very often that scene was filmed somewhere other than the United States. So these are the sorts of things you see. So the how and the what are the main things. You're looking at what is it that you're regulating and how is it that you regulate it.
I think I might have thought of one, but technically, I don't know, is libel still a thing?
Libel?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can still get arrested for libel depending on what it is.
I was gonna say maybe freedom of speech.
Yeah, and we'll come back, even freedom, we'll be talking at the end of class, even freedom of speech though has some limits. So like what sorts of things, anyone know off the top of their head what you aren't allowed, like the First Amendment allows freedom of speech, but there are still certain things you're not allowed to do. One of them is make up lies. What's another one?
Screaming fire in a movie.
Yeah, you can't scream things which are likely to cause chaos in a public place. So like, if you walk into an airport and scream something like, oh my God, he's got a gun, that's illegal because you're trying to cause chaos and could lead to damage. There are also other things you aren't allowed to do, like you aren't allowed to write a manual on how to make a bomb out of household materials and deliver it to like kindergartners. That is also illegal. Technically, like in extreme freedom of speech, we'd be allowed to do that, but even the United States has limits on what you're allowed to do and what you're allowed to say. So yeah, there's really just about nothing that we have complete freedom on, and there's also very few things that are completely banned. So that's what we're talking about with regulation. Now, why are we talking about this in this class? Unsurprisingly, overlap with cyber technology. In particular, what we're going to talk about is, like, the internet is like the place where most of us spend much of our time. And the fact is that, like everything else, it seems like we want some degree of regulation on the internet. What are some things that happen on the internet that we all, or most of us, think should be regulated to some degree? Why isn't it that we think anything goes on the internet? What are some examples of things that we want regulated that can appear on the internet or that involve exchanges on the internet?
Like the bullying videos.
Pardon?
Like someone's bullied videos.
Yeah, bullying videos and things like that. We don't
Or
want.
fight videos.
Yeah, we don't want. There are certain types of videos which appear on the internet which we don't want. We don't want people bullying each other on the internet. At least it seems like that's a better society where we don't have those sorts of things. To go to an even more extreme case, what other sorts of videos might we not want to allow on the internet?
Fighting videos, like, you know, like how one person is fighting another person, like a physical brawl.
Yeah,
or like,
I think it seems like there might be certain types of physical brawls. But
I jointly in cases of calls to violence.
yeah, so one thing you might not want is literally somebody posting on YouTube calling people to attack somebody else, like a literal call to assault this person. You might not want that. Or in an extreme case, say this assault call works, what might happen? If somebody says, we all need to beat up so-and-so, what might happen? Somebody might beat up so-and-so, and then somebody might be there filming and being like, watch us beat the crap out of this person and post it to the internet. In an extreme case, what was one of the first things that Facebook had to worry about with censorship? What was the first type of videos that they were finding on their platform and going, oh no, we should not allow these here? Does anyone know?
The politics.
Even more than that, there was a very particular actions that were being, pardon? Yeah, beheadings. There were ISIS beheading videos in which captured prisoners were being videotaped getting their heads chopped off, and these were being posted to Facebook. And this is a case where you might think, oh no, we should not allow videos of people getting their heads chopped off posted on Facebook. Other ones are like videos in which children are being sexually abused. These are other sorts of things in which basically everyone's like, no, we should not allow these videos free reign on the internet. But of course, if we want to regulate the internet, so we all think that we need some degree of regulation. What's the obvious question now, though? How do you do it? How do you regulate the internet? And how do you regulate cyber tech in general? And what we're going to find, like all things in this semester, is that we want there to be regulation. The way you can think of this class is up to this point we've talked about a lot of issues that happen with cyber technology and cyberspace, and what the need is to regulate it and put control and stop chaos from ensuing. And what we're going to do now, though, is look at, all right, given all of this, how do we regulate it? What can be done? And we'll see that part of the reason why there's not more regulation is when we're talking about the internet and talking about cyber technology, regulating is really hard. And the issue comes down to the nature of the technology and the ways we typically regulate things and how poorly they apply to cyberspace. So let's just start off firstly. When you're regulating something, what you're regulating affects how you regulate it. So for instance, the Pentagon is regulated. First off, what's the Pentagon? Anyone know?
It's the military.
Yeah, it's basically where the Department of Defense and like the NSA and all of them have their headquarters. I actually don't know if the NSA is there, but I know it's like where the Department of Defense and a lot of important people in the Department of Defense have their headquarters in Washington. When I say it's regulated, what do I mean? How is that building regulated? And why is it called the Pentagon? Anyone know? It's literally a 5-sided building. Yeah, it looks. If you look at it from above, it literally just looks like this.
They wasn't really creative with, you know.
Yeah, it's not. I think it might even have like a little pentagonal hole in the middle or something like that. But yeah, it's literally just a pentagonal building, so it's called the Pentagon. When I say it's regulated, what do I mean? How is the Pentagon regulated? Laws, but specifically, like, how is it?
It's physically secure, so you can't just go in.
Yeah, exactly. It's got doors, and it's got walls, and it's got check cards that you need to scan, and you've got guards there preventing you. Like, if you wanted to walk into the Pentagon today, you would be stopped before you got within, like, 100 feet of the door. And if you wanted to get permission to go in, you would have to go through a whole lot of background checks and every other damn thing. So yeah, that's generally what regulation looks like. What are some other places that are regulated in this sense? I mean, John Jay's one, same sort of thing. We got people at the doors.
White House, Capitol.
Pardon?
White House.
Yeah, the White House, any sort of government building, really any building these days, you need some sort of card. The subway system is to some degree regulated. You need to swipe.
Like when I went to go get my birth certificate downtown, like I couldn't even get in that building without.
Yeah, it's basically any building you want to get in. Your house has regulation in this sense. And what this is one of the types of things we regulate in this way are just places. And what we mean by places here is physical places. And how do you regulate a physical place? Well, you just literally physically put up barriers that prevent people from getting in there. So for instance, in a case like bookstores have degrees of regulation, or movie theaters. Like there are certain types of movie theaters where you are not allowed in a certain theater unless you're 17, and they physically keep you out. So that's how you regulate a place. And a lot of the things that we regulate are places, and we control who can get into where and how people can access it. Another thing you can think of is like a pharmacy. You can't get whatever you want from Duane Reade. You can get a lot of what you want just by walking around and picking things up, but there are certain things you cannot get yourself. What sorts of things am I talking about?
Prescription drugs.
Yeah, anything with a prescription drug, anything behind the counter. And how is it that they prevent you from getting to those things? They literally have a desk there that you would have to leap over. So that's what we mean by regulating places. You literally just put up physical barriers to stop people. But that's not the only way that we get things and get information. What's another type of way that we get things and get information? Not in physical space, but
Through medium.
yeah, through medium. Or what's the plural of medium? Media. So, when people are talking about the media, what it originally comes from is this term medium. And this is medium not in the sense of not big, not small, it's medium, but in the sense of the person who talks to ghosts. How many people have heard it in this sense? Like when you hear like, this person talks to ghosts, they are a medium. What does that mean? It means that they are the means that the ghost uses to talk to other people. So this is what we're talking about with media. It's the way in which information gets passed. So, what are we talking about here?
Space. ways through which we can communicate?
Yeah, it's about like, it's the wiring and the things that like travel along those wires. So what are some examples we're talking about here? And let's not talk about the internet because we're gonna come to that in a second. What are some other ones?
Like videos.
Yeah, TV, movie, basically anything that comes through your television, unless it's an internet television, that's complicated. But like old time, like public television or the radio. It's literally just things where if you have the right piece of technology, you can get access to that.
Or art.
Yeah, so art or writing or that sort of thing are also forms of media, so a medium. So, in this way, with a place, you just stop people from getting there. What's the issue if you were to try to regulate a medium in this way? Does it work? What would it be to cordon off part of the radio?
That would threaten access to that kind of information.
Yeah, so you have to threaten access, but it's not really, because of the nature of what a medium is, you can't really just say, no. You're allowed to go to this part of the radio waves, but not that part of the radio waves. Or like, you're allowed to have this television access, but not that. It doesn't really make sense, so how instead are things like radio and TV regulated? It's not about who can go where, because there is no where. It doesn't really exist in a where. So what is the rules for determining, like, is anything allowed to be said on the radio?
Nope.
No. How is it regulated?
Through licensing and market restrictions?
Yeah, so there's licensing and market restrictions, and also there are rules about things you just are not allowed to show. So it's not about regulating. So in a place, you're allowed to have whatever you want. So like, let's just take pornography. If you go to a bookstore and there are pornographic magazines, they're allowed to have them there, but they have to be wrapped up in like plastic wrap and kept apart from other things. So you're allowed to have any content you want. It's just you can like cordon it off and keep people from getting there. With media, by contrast, everyone who has access to the media, you can't just say like, we're gonna put on like whatever, you can put on whatever porn you want, you're just not allowed to have children watch it. Well, children are gonna get there. It's not like a physical place where you can put a door. As long as you've got a television, you can access it. So the rule is just, you're not allowed to put certain things on the TV at certain times, or you're not allowed to say certain things on the radio. And so that's how media get regulated. You control what's allowed to appear on them. With places, you control who's allowed to get in which areas. Media, you control who's allowed to access, or who's allowed to, or I guess more accurately, what's allowed to be put on it. So this, with places, you regulate where, and with media, you regulate what.
I guess maybe like the issue with media versus like the actual places is like, well, because since you're going into a place, like you can, the place itself, you can just stop you from going there.
Exactly.
But the media, because the people receiving the media, it's not a matter of stopping them from accessing. It's about stopping or not have, they can't literally have access to it.
Yeah, so that's a really good way of putting it. The way to think about it is the nature of places are such that you can say certain people aren't allowed in a certain place. But media, the nature of media is such that as long as it exists, everyone can access it. Therefore, the only way to regulate media is to prevent things from appearing on it. So for instance, you're not allowed to show pornography on television at noon on like a Saturday because children have access to that time and space. There are also sorts of things of like certain types of videos you just are not allowed to put on the airwaves. Like again, even if there was a beheading that took place, like if you can imagine like an important US government figure being kidnapped and then beheaded, they would not be allowed to show that tape. And the reason why is because it's just there are certain rules, you are not allowed to show certain things on television. So, why am I talking so much about media and places and regulation right now in this class?